Hey everyone, Lev here with another episode of Level Up with Lev. Today we're discussing a topic of such grand importance that I could probably talk to you about it for hours on end, but in the spirit of keeping things short and digestible, I'll probably split this topic up into multiple episodes. So today's topic involves the concept of influences. And to begin, I will say that in addition to the lottery of the conditions of our birth and our upbringing, including our IQ, the country we're born in, the color of our skin, the experiences during our childhood and formative years, those things that we can't control, who we are is fundamentally comprised of the culmination of all of these experiences, as well as what we have been and are currently being exposed to most frequently. So there's both an aspect of the what and how often. Now, this affects who we are, what we believe is possible, and what we're ultimately able to become. So, in essence, our potential. And not only our potential, but also our energy or aura, whatever the popular term for it is these days, which essentially refers to the essence that we carry within us, how we feel internally, which then reflects externally. And I believe that this is vitally important for us to realize as soon as possible. So today I hope to introduce and to relay the importance of influences in our lives so that we can further take control of our future growth and development and keep us on the path to becoming our best selves. So here's what to expect in today's episode. I'll start with an introduction to the topic of influences, which again will be discussed over a couple episodes. I really want to reinforce that we have the ability to control, shape, and monitor our influences, which ultimately in turn shape us. Then I'll share some general things that I keep in mind when it comes to monitoring these influences. I also hope to convey that influences aren't just other people. They also include other aspects of our environment as well. And of crucial importance, we can't forget that we also have our own internal influence over ourselves as well. So there's a lot of ground that I hope to cover in today's episode, so let's go ahead and dive right in. So when we were younger and more dependent on our parents and other institutions, we didn't have as much control over the influences in our lives. These things were mostly decided for us. And as we age, we become fundamentally less dependent on our parents and these other institutions, and we gain this increased sense of control and agency over the influences in our lives. But even when we were younger and dependent on our parents and these other institutions, we still were instilled with the idea that we do have an aspect of control over the influences in our lives. For example, we might have heard the advice, choose your friends wisely, or don't hang with the wrong crowd. And I'm sure at some point, one of your parents asked you, if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you? And my personal answer is maybe. It depends on the size of the bridge and how high it is off the water. Maybe. It sounds fun. As I got older and I started to notice the effects of this autonomy and agency over the influences in my life, I noticed how much of an ability I had to truly shape how my life turns out. Now, given the ultimate importance and the role of influences in our lives, as I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, in addition to this newfound sense of agency and control over the influences in our lives, let's discuss some of the aspects of influence that I keep in mind when it comes to shaping what I'm exposed to on a frequent basis. So before I get into the specific aspects of influence as I've come to understand them, I want to share some general things that I keep in mind when it comes to monitoring and assessing my influences. So we can think about the items I'm about to share as being themes. And the first theme that I want to share is the theme of alignment. And the first way that I think about alignment is that the influences in my life should be aligned with my goals. We'll talk about that perhaps more in next week's episode. And another way to think about alignment is to consider the following questions. In what direction am I going? In which direction is this influence going? And in what direction would I head if I'm influenced by this particular thing consistently over time? Another theme that we can consider is something that came from my days when I worked as a counselor at a day camp, and this is the concept of assessing whether something fills your bucket or drains it. And to do so, I ask two simple questions. How does this thing make me feel? And what are my thoughts on this particular thing? And sometimes it just boils down to a gut feeling. And as with most topics in personal development, this really requires that I reflect and introspect and really get in tune with my feelings and my thoughts on a particular subject, and also honoring and respecting those feelings. And the final point is the combined themes of frequency and balance. So the way that I've come to understand influences is that the strength of a particular influence is strongly tied to the frequency of exposure to that particular influence. So how often you interact with a particular thing. And naturally associated with that is the idea of balance. And balance will remain a common theme with anything that I discuss on this channel. Moderation is always key. So now with those general themes out of the way, let's go ahead and discuss some of the specific aspects as I've come to understand them. Now, note that this is a list of just 4 items, and this conversation, of course, could span many more items than those on this list, but these are the ones that I typically focus on when it comes to my particular journey. And you're probably going to be aware of most, if not all of these things, so bear with me as I step through them. After all, the information contained in this podcast isn't rocket science. These 4 items are ourselves, other people, our environment, and the media we consume. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start talking about each of these aspects of influences in our lives. So the first aspect, as I mentioned, is ourselves. And this might have been something that surprises you. I would venture to say that the most important influence over ourselves is ourselves. Influence is defined as a person or a thing that has an effect. And I would consider myself as a person that has an effect on myself. Now, this was crucial for me to realize and really internalize for a number of reasons, but ultimately it's the most empowering realization. At the end of the day, we are the ones that act. We're the ones that decide to do one thing or another, based on what goes on behind our eyes and between our ears. We make that decision to buy that cheeseburger when we know that we have food at home. We make the decision to not stock the pantry with sweets and unhealthy foods when we know we're on a diet. By the way, that's an example of aligning our influences with our goals. We take in the information from the external world, combine it with our internal drives, thoughts, values, goals, etc., and we move from there. We have the ability to choose what we do on a daily basis in each moment. And I want to quickly relate this to a previous episode I put out called Accepting Lev for Lev. And in that episode, I discussed showing myself compassion, understanding, forgiveness, and vulnerability. In short, self-love. And for me, the most radical form of self-love and self-compassion that I've experienced is caring about myself enough to care about what affects me and my growth and development. Now, this includes the people I surround myself with, the food I put in my body, the music I listen to, the behavior I tolerate from others, and so much more. I have grown to love and respect myself so much that I genuinely care and want the best for myself, as if I were a friend or a loved one. Now, this is similar to Jordan Peterson's second rule in his best-selling book, 12 Rules for Life, which reads, "Treat yourself like you are someone you are responsible for helping." I genuinely want the best for myself and my future. I love myself. And that may have taken quite a bit of time, but I worked at it intentionally. And here we are. This mental framing was crucial for my growth. And the more I started to change my outlook in this manner, the more I started to realize a few things. First, the importance of perspectives and mindsets on our experiences in life. And we'll talk more about this in depth next season. Also, the positive general effect that it's had in my life, both in that those things that didn't serve me well for my growth and my future in a way that I thought would be beneficial for me started to fall away, especially as I took a more active role in this process. Also, things that are beneficial or those things suited to my ideal future started to come and accumulate in my life. Basically, I stopped accepting anything that would be less than ideal for myself and my growth, especially if I'd be exposed to these things on a frequent basis. And this naturally became a feedback loop where I started to notice the positive results and continued to adjust and tailor my behavior accordingly in a way that favored those positive results. As my greatest influence, I know that I will always have my own back. And this is a work in progress, and I expect that it always will be. Now, next up, we have other people. And this is probably what you imagined I'd be discussing in this episode. You've likely heard notions such as, you are the people you surround yourself with, or you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Now, you may notice this in your own life, and I will say that there is some legitimacy to this, for a number of potential reasons. First, we tend to adopt the attitudes, behaviors, and values of the people we spend our time with. For example, our good friends or our colleagues at work. These attitudes and behaviors are in some sense a way to fit in with the group, but in other ways, they add a sense of normalcy and regularity to our lives. Now, this is something to be extremely aware of, especially if you're someone who is easily influenced by other people. And full transparency, I can be easily influenced by other people myself. So, sorry mom, but yes, I just might jump off that bridge after we've deemed it to be safe, of course. Now, that last point is where the relation to the general season comes into play, the season of understanding myself. Given this self-knowledge of my own influenceability, and yes, I checked on Google, apparently that's an actual word, so we're going to use it here, I have become much more vigilant not only about what influences me in my own life, but my own personal degree of influenceability, which, again, as I mentioned before, has made me all the more vigilant about tailoring and monitoring the external influences in my own life. And we'll discuss more about how I directly approach tailoring my influences in next week's episode. But some general notes for now involve paying attention to first these aspects of influence and also alignment, as I mentioned previously. Now, the third item on our list is environment. Basically, I've come to realize that there are a large number of things that we're exposed to on a daily basis that affect our behavior and the way that we think, and how we may or may not actually be aware of them. So I really try to be on top of understanding what is influencing me and in what ways. And interestingly enough, this does does include aspects of our local environment. And here are just a few of the noteworthy items that I've worked to monitor and adjust over time. One aspect of my environment involves organization and general cleanliness. Having a clean room or a clean environment seems to affect our ability to think. Now, some are able to think very well in a messy space, but more often, and I think the general case is that we would all at least benefit in some way, shape, or form from having a cleaner or more organized space in which we think or work. Now, I've personally noticed this to be the case in my own life. My brain definitely functions better when my desk is clean or when my room or my office space is organized. And if not for the aspect of mirroring that happens in our brains, cluttered space equals cluttered brain, clean space equals clean brain, then absolutely for the fact that knowing where different things are reduces the time wasted trying to find, for example, our keys or a particular notebook or where documents are saved on our computer. So at minimum, this will reduce the complexity of our environment so we aren't distracted by or thinking about the things that are on our desk or what's in our bedroom or in our kitchen, etc. General order and organization have both made my life much easier. Next up, we have decorations. Everything around us, including the way that we decorate our places, like the artwork on our walls, the color of our walls, scents, things of that nature, they all have some form of influence on us. Though we may choose them according to our taste, there are subtle ways that these everyday items may interact with our mood or perceptions below our level of conscious awareness. And this isn't mystical or anything like that, it actually seems to be the case. Now, one of the ways that I personally use the concept of decorations in a way to influence me in one way or another is my lock screen. Now, my phone's lock screen is the bust of Marcus Aurelius, who is one of the greatest emperors of the Roman Empire and perhaps of all time, and one of the most important influences on my own mindset, which I'll discuss more next season. And finally, the literal aspects of our local environment, which include our neighborhoods and communities, the places that we frequent, and things of that nature. Now, the final item on this list includes media that we consume. So I'll wrap up today's discussion by talking about the media we consume, its large impact on our lives, and how I personally tailor it for my growth. Now, the first piece of media that I'll discuss is music, and I've mentioned this in a previous episode called How the Truth Set Me Free. And music is more influential on our moods and general outlook than we may realize. In that episode, I specifically mentioned how I wanted to improve my general mood and have a more positive outlook on life, or at least one that favored my growth and development. So shifting from music with sadder tones to music that was more tailored to my goals helped immensely. Now, I do acknowledge that there is a deeper discussion to be had here and a lot of nuances exist, so I will leave it relatively surface level. But just keep in the back of your head that the music we listen to, including the lyrics and the general vibe, can affect the way that we think and feel. Now, this can be positive or negative, but it also depends on other factors such as your own personal goals and preferences and your level of influenceability or suggestibility. And as a musician, I certainly acknowledge that a lot of nuances exist here. And of course, you can appreciate music as a form of art itself. You can also relate deeply with music, even if it isn't completely in alignment with your goals. Just keep it in mind and remember that moderation and balance are key.
Hey, this guy's a music hater. He hates music.
Not true, not true. And another item includes the books that we read. Some of my strongest influences or mentors are no longer alive, but their words and teachings are very much alive in the printed materials or recordings available. And no, I'm not delusional. I know it may sound weird to consider some of them as mentors, and they aren't exactly my friends, but their influence on me is just as strong, if not stronger. So I pay a lot of attention to this. And of course, a similar conversation could be had regarding other forms of media, such as TV shows, movies, and so on and so forth. And the final item, which is social media. This discussion was initially included in last week's episode regarding bandwidth and capacity, but I decided to cut it out and include it in today's discussion, partially for time and partially for relevance. So in this particular light, I want to discuss my relationship with social media and how it's developed over time and how I currently tailor it in relation to its influence on me. First, social media is a tool, and as with all tools, they are neither good nor evil. It really just depends on how they're used and what they're used for. And personally, I predominantly use social media to engage with family and friends, but also for learning, which I've mentioned before and I'll discuss a bit more now. The algorithms are particularly good at showing you what will capture your attention most and keep you on the apps. This is how they're designed, and they're really good at it. By extension, this design relies upon the way that you use it and the way that you interact with these apps. For example, the reels you watch and the length of time you spend watching them, the kind of content you like or comment on, and and so forth. All of that said, if we keep in mind the theme of frequency, as I mentioned previously, for example, if you spend a lot of time on social media apps, personally, I check the apps daily, I found it important to realize that this frequency comes with an increased amount of influence that the content on these apps will have on us. So I have found it most fruitful to have this understanding of how the algorithms work in order to maximize my agency and control over the content I'm exposed to on a daily basis, and thus control the influences that influence me, if that isn't too convoluted. Perhaps I should explain. In essence, my personal experience and my personal preference has been to see social media as a tool that allows me and enables me to connect with family and friends, and also provides me with this ability to learn different things in so many different topics. So moving beyond the all too common advice of simply minimizing my use of social media, I've come to be a bit more practical and strategic in my approach to its use. So here are a few ways that I interact with the social media platforms in order to tailor their influence on me. First, I aim to tailor the social media content so I only see what I want to see. Now, this could be content based on cooking, fitness, finance, motivational material, and more. And to reiterate, I do stand by the fact that social media can be a great tool for learning. And as an aside, there's nothing wrong with using them for entertainment as well, as long as you remember to keep their use in moderation. So I tailor what the algorithms show me by using features such as not interested in this content or show me less of this. And these features work really, really well. Again, because the platform wants you to be satisfied with the experience and wants to get a good sense of what will keep you on the app. And thus, they tend to make a concerted effort to show you less of what will keep you off of the app. And of course, the reverse of this is if I want to see more of a particular form of content, then I will like and or comment on it or watch the entire reel. And of course, follow different channels for the type of material that they produce. Now, I like to get a little advanced with it, so I do use different platforms differently for different reasons, but I think that's enough about social media for now. All in all, if you want to optimize both your mental capacity and tailor your influences for your success, monitoring the way that you use social media, a tool, will be very beneficial for you in the long run. Certainly has been for me. Final thoughts. What we spend our time on most frequently, who we spend our time with, and what media we engage with all affect our lives in deeper ways than we might imagine. Now, the good news is that we have the ability to monitor and control what influences us on a daily basis. At the end of the day, we are the strongest influences on ourselves. When I came to understand and truly use this information to my advantage, I saw and continue to see incredible advances in my personal growth. With that, we wrap up today's episode on influences. This has been an introduction. I'm super excited for next week's episode where I dive into more specific approaches and a particular mental framework that I use when I conceptualize the different influences in my life. So tune in next week. Thank you for watching. If you like this episode, go ahead and leave a like down below. I look forward to talking to you next week. I hope you have a great day.